Wonderful. Okay, so let's dive right into Rhapsody in Blue. There's so much to talk about. I also want to leave a lot of room for questions because there's so much of this piece that I think begs a lot of questions. Maybe I'll answer some, maybe not. I don't know. We'll find out. Before we get going, we do have file transfer backup on Zoom. That is a thing again. So I'm going to try, and I use the word try, to send over to you my Gershwin analysis document, as well as the score to Rhapsody in Blue. So these are two documents that I'm sending to you via chat. Now, when you do see those links, we're trying to see if this file transfer thing is gonna work. I'm hoping it does. Don't worry, if it doesn't, I'll still share my screen and then send it to you after the meeting. But for right now, I wanna just see if this file transfer function works, and make sure that your settings in Zoom are set to receive documents, that you actually can receive them. So you should have two from me right now, the analysis doc and the score itself. So just by show of thumbs up, does everybody have those two, and can you open those two documents? Thumbs up. I see a lot of folks with no video. Well, if feel free to chat me too. You can send me a private chat. That also would be fine. Just let me know if you did get it or not, because we'll be referring to both of them. Savannah, no bueno, huh? Okay, Tessia also no. Okay. No, Melanie said no as well. Okay, so clearly the file transfer thing is not an ideal situation. So here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna try to send us an email. While I do that, I would like for you all to listen to the following piece. Well, Rhapsody in Blue, no secret there. But what's really cool is how short this version is and who the soloist is. The soloist is none other than Mr. George Gershwin himself. This is a really cool video. I want you to just take a listen to it. The link should be in the chat box. Hopefully that's in the chat box. Okay, good. So if you do have that, at least just, if you can't click on it, just copy and paste it into your YouTube or your search browser or whatever. And I'm gonna get this email going to everyone because I want you all to have these docs. So those of you that are calling in, if you could somehow chat me and let me know who it is that I have on this chat, that way I can email you these docs too. Okay. So go ahead and take a listen to that document as I type this email up. Mel and Abigail, if you guys have any ideas about how to do this more efficiently, let me know. Okay, cool. So I see what Abigail is saying, and I think I'm going to do that indeed. So let me just go to my drive and do that.
I think. Yeah, it's my audio.
Okay.
All right.
Oh, got it.
All right, I'm going to try to Abigail, I'm sending you the link. Is this how I should format it, or should I do it another way? Let me know if that works for you or not. Welcome, welcome, Harry and Ellen. How are we? How are we?
Good, good. How are you?
Good, 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 good.
You're still playing with the computer.
Oh, that's totally fine. Totally fine. I'm trying to figure out how to get everyone documents right now, so bear with me for a second. All right.
Change the sharing options so that anyone with the link can view.
Are you sitting here next
So
to
I
me?
don't have to request access.
Okay, got it. Good call. All right.
You're Abigail.
Hi.
Okay, sharing. Where is that? Let's see, share. What? I thought, okay. So, okay. Crazy, crazy. I wish the file transfer thing just worked because that would be the simplest thing, but it doesn't. So, let's see if this works. Share. Can view. Yes. Perfect. So I should have changed the settings now, so this should work for everyone. Hopefully. Please let me know if that works.
You seem so far away.
Okay.
I think you should move the couch up. It's so far away.
It would be easier to move the computer.
Oh, wait.
Oh, man, fear. Harry, I see you there with your snacks.
So I sent you all 2 separate links. It's just 2 documents today, so it's not going to be a lot. And I sent them to the Drive files individually. So you have 2 separate docs. One of them is the 2 piano Rhapsody in Blue score. So it's basically Gershwin's original score for this. And the other one is my little analysis doc. Each one of these I have that document for you all. So it's just those 2 things today. And now that we all have that, I'm going to jump into sharing my screen.
You know what? If you get that chair, there's a big chair to put there.
All right, so let's dive in. I'm not going to talk a lot about Gershwin himself as a composer and things like that. The things I will say about him, what you need to know about Gershwin is that he was part of a movement called Tin Pan Alley, and he was a very, very famous songwriter before we know him because we play in the orchestra. We know him as an orchestral composer. He wrote tone poems, American in Paris, Rhapsody in Blue. He wrote a lot of piano music. But before all that, he was actually an arranger and a very good arranger, but he was also an extremely good melody writer. He was one of the people in Tin Pan Alley that would like just pump out 100 famous tunes and just catchy melodies. You've heard the name Irving Berlin. They actually worked together. Little known fact. So Gershwin was part of that movement. So he was known, and he had so much practice writing these really catchy tunes. And Rhapsody in Blue is chock full of them. So it really speaks to Gershwin as a composer. Some of his melodies that you may recognize, even though you may not know they're by him. Embraceable You, which has become a jazz standard nowadays. His first big hit, which is Swanee, you may have heard of that one, and the big one, I Got Rhythm. All right, so he helped, there's hundreds of other ones, but these are the 3 that really pop out. So he was known for his melodic writing. He was also known for his playing, and he made money in his youth by playing extremely difficult things outside of a publishing house. Basically how that all worked back in the day was you would walk down the street, and outside of each one of these houses was a publishing house, literally a publishing house. and somebody would write a piece of music and then give it to the pianist. The pianist would run outside or to the first floor window and just start playing away on the piano and, like, you know, trying to convince people to buy that sheet music. And that's how it pretty much worked. Well, Gershwin was skilled in both of these. And so he made his living arranging pieces and playing pieces. And that's how he got to be not only a good composer, but also a good performer. Got very comfortable in both genres. And so, you know, I just talked about here about his other melodic gifts. So Bernstein, who we all know and love and has performed this, there's a very famous recording of him performing this piece, once said about Rhapsody in Blue, the themes are terrific, inspired, God-given. I don't think there's been such an inspired melodist on this earth since Tchaikovsky. High praise. And I want you to remember the comparison to Tchaikovsky because it's going to come back a little bit later. Okay. And so I mentioned that he wrote in that very kind of catchy Tin Pan Alley style where a lot of it was very, very famous songs like I Got Rhythm. Well, these all came in a very standard form, a 16 or 32 bar form. Those of you that are jazzers also recognize that that's also a very popular jazz form. And so right away, Gershwin was known for pop and jazz. And he wrote in both styles with a lot of ease. I'm going to try to show you something, actually. Forgive me. Oh, it's a lot of things open here. Where is that screenshot that I really want to show you? Okay, of course I can't find it. That's it right there. Okay, so take a look at this right here. Everybody see that on my screen, the AABA idea? This is going to be quite important for us to look at. So I'm going to just enlarge this. This is I Got Rhythm. This is the melodic structure of I Got Rhythm. So I'm going to walk over to the piano and just tinkle some ivories to get you an idea of what this sounds like here. So here we go. Basically, the A section. Forgive that E natural. That was whatever, you know, it's fine. But the point is that's the A section, and then he repeats it. So the idea of repetition is very, very important. Again, these are probably times where you're going to hear a piece once or twice maybe. So the more times you repeat an idea, the better. So you repeat the A section twice, kind of like the sonata form, by the way. And then you have this B section. Often called the bridge or linking material. And now we're back to AABA, very standard form. And this was pretty much the accepted form for a lot of these big hits and tunes. And if you listen back to a lot of these, you'll hear what I'm talking about. But that's an important thing to remember because this was basically how he was writing music at this time, right? So where'd my Word doc go? That's not what I want. I want this. All right, so we've given you a little bit of intro into Gershwin. So he was commissioned to write this piece in 1924, the same year it premiered. How it came to be as a piece is quite funny, actually. So he had collaborated with Paul Whiteman. Does anybody know that name, Paul Whiteman? Does that ring a bell to anyone? He premiered a lot of important pieces. He premiered a lot of Grofé's pieces. He did some of Copland's pieces. Gershwin, obviously, he premiered a lot of works and he commissioned a lot of works. He commissioned a lot of works also in the jazz idiom and the popular idiom. So if you can imagine the impact that Koussevitzky had on commissioning orchestral works, he's like the pop/jazz version of Koussevitzky. So Paul Whiteman's an incredibly important guy. He had his own band in New York, a jazz band. And so he commissioned Gershwin to write a piece in 24. They had worked together one time before on a piece called Scandals of 1922. And he was also impressed with Gershwin's one-act opera, Blue Monday. The title may sound pretty familiar as far as Rhapsody in Blue is concerned. The two are not related, but even how the name came to be is not related to that. But even then, you can see where this is kind of headed, what Whiteman wanted from him. And what Whiteman wanted was a jazz concerto. He wanted a piano concerto that featured obviously the piano, but also the jazz band. So, and Gershwin's challenge was to make this exciting, new, different, somehow a new piece that's going to be recognizable, really a hallmark of the piano rep. But how it actually came to be was rather interesting, and I say that here. I put it into quotes because commissioned. So basically, Whiteman approaches Gershwin. I may get some of the details of this story wrong. If I do, forgive me. But basically, comes up to him, tells him the idea, and says, "Listen, I would love for you to write this piece." Gershwin flat out tells him, "No." His opera Blue Monday just flopped so bad, and he said, "I need to rework that score, rewrite it. I'm not used to having commercial failures. This is like, no, it can't happen. I just don't have the time. Don't no." The story goes that literally that same day, he goes to play pool, billiards, whatever, at, I forget what hotel it is. And he's there with his brother, Ira Gershwin. And Ira Gershwin brings in a newspaper that says something to the effect of, "Oh, and George Gershwin is writing a new piano concerto in the style of jazz. And Victor Herbert's writing this, and other people are writing that." And so Gershwin was a bit confused. He just turned down Whiteman. How on earth am I supposed to be, what? And he calls Whiteman in the morning, and Whiteman basically tells him, "Yeah, so listen, I'm basically going to give this to your biggest rival. So you can either write it or the other guy can get the fame, because I basically want this to be a big success." That's how the piece came to be, thankfully. Thankfully for Paul Whiteman, who pressed hard and kind of pulled a shoddy move on Gershwin by basically outing him into the press that's saying he's going to do it. Don't worry, guys, he's going to do it. He told me no, but he's going to write it, so it's fine. Big risk to take, but it worked out in the end. So he wrote this pretty quickly, actually. And the original title for this was American Rhapsody. That's an important name, because what Gershwin was attempting to do in this was to really write an all-encompassing piece. A piece that fused jazz, ragtime, folk music, but still had elements of classical romantic ideas, really a fusion, all the things that America was becoming. This idea that pop music and dance music can live in the same space as classical romantic music, all into one. What he was after was really the development of a brand new genre of music. And I kid you not, this was a goal of his. And he actually has a quote here that I really, really like. His goal was to unify art forms. He has this quote. It says, "The American soul is black and white, all colors and all souls unified." Very important quote, because obviously the idea of race relations back then was very different than what it is today. But also historically, musically speaking, jazz was not a white person's music, and classical was not a black person's music. And so the two worlds were very much split and lived in that way. In fact, after Gershwin passed away, that idea kind of grew even further more separated. When Copland comes back from Paris, Louis Armstrong comes back from Chicago, the whole styles kind of diverge. They don't kind of converge as Gershwin wanted, but that's what he was after. He really believed in this idea that all music is the same, and we living here in America should have our music reflect that there should not be this separation. He wanted to combine it all, and I think he also saw the commercial gains that were possible with this. He saw how popular pop music and jazz music could be. That was his goal. So he began writing this piece on a train, on the train from Boston to Boston from New York. And there's a great quote here that I would love for you all to read if you could, because it speaks a lot about the piece itself. I'm going to highlight some words that are important here. Train. Those of you that are calling in, I'm not sure if you have the video, so actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to read this quote to you all. "It was on the train with its steely rhythms, its rattly bang that is so often so stimulating to a composer. I frequently hear music in the very heart of the noise. And there I suddenly heard and even saw on paper the complete construction of the Rhapsody from beginning to end. No new themes came to me, but I worked on the thematic material already in my mind and tried to conceive the composition as a whole. I heard it as a sort of musical kaleidoscope of America, of our vast melting pot, of our unduplicated national pep, of our metropolitan madness. By the time I reached Boston, I had a definite plot of the piece as distinguished from its actual substance." again, kind of summarizing what I just said, but the idea of a metropolitan madness of a vast melting pot, the train and its rhythms, the rattly bang, thematic material that kind of grew to be influenced by these concepts. This is basically the best summary of Rhapsody in Blue that exists. So he wrote this in the span of, I think it was 2 months, I want to say. And the original version he wrote was a 2-piano version. He's used to writing arrangements, remember. And he wrote this 2-piano version and handed it over to Ferdy Grofé. That's right, the same one that wrote the Grand Canyon Suite. We played the Mississippi Suite a few years ago. He gave it to Grofé to orchestrate 8 days before the premiere. That's right. Gershwin himself premiered the piece on piano, and the band, Paul Whiten's band, played it 8 days after Grofé started orchestrating it. Fun times for Grofé and trying to get this all out in an orderly and mannerly fashion. I'm sure it was stress-free. But thankfully, it was successful. The premiere itself was an incredible experience. I would have loved to have been there. Why? Because I want you to check out the guest list here. Just take a look at who's in attendance. Rachmaninoff, Stravinsky, John Philip Sousa, and Willie Lyon Smith. I mean, if that's not a who's who of like the widest ends of the spectrum musically, I don't know what else would be. The same guy that wrote Rite of Spring is sitting next to the guy that wrote Stars and Stripes Forever. Oh, okay. And literally, Willie the Lion was sitting next to Stravinsky. So I want you to just bear that in mind. These two knew each other. A stride pianist, a black stride pianist, was sitting next to this Russian, French, American hybrid of a composer. Just an incredible event. And so this was marketed to be that way, that this is a premiere of a piece that is really new. And we really want you to take note of it and watch it and see it. And all 4 of them loved it. They thought it was fantastic. And in this piece, we literally heard a rendition of a very new style of music, crossing of very different ideas. So the question is, how do you classify this piece today? And before we get into the actual piece, I'm actually very curious. I would love to hear from you all. How do you classify this piece today? Do you think of it as jazz, classical, romantic, post, whatever? I mean, what is your thought about this? And I'd love to just shout it out. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are.
What do you want to mean?
I don't know. I'm thinking it's
I think it's divided up into 2 different parts. I always thought the first part was more jazzy and the second part was more classic.
Okay.
Whole part.
I think it's mixed with classical and jazz in too, in unique hybrid way.
Okay, both. Cindy says jazz. Savannah says all of the above. Anyone else? Any other ventures into this foray? No?
It's just American. It's the
it.
American sound.
It really is. I mean, this piece does not really have a home in any one camp because it exists in all camps, and that really is the definition of American music. Thankfully, this premiere was so successful for him, it solidified his place as a serious composer. He had already had a lot of fame writing popular pieces. I don't know if you all remember when we did American in Paris, I told you the story that he went to Paris to try to study with Ravel, and Ravel kicked him out of the studio because you have nothing to learn from me. You would only become less of yourself, and you would lose your sound. And oh, by the way, you make a lot more money than I do, so why on earth would you want to study with me? Was Ravel's response. But yeah, it's true. It really is. He has such a unique voice, and I'm glad he didn't do that. After its premiere, Gershwin himself played Rhapsody in Blue 84 times by 1927. 84 times he played it, and it sold over 1 million copies. He did just fine playing this piece. What's really cool is during the 1984 Olympics in LA, 84 pianists simultaneously played the piece. Kind of an homage to the times Gershwin played the piece himself. So the number 84 is very significant, kind of amazing. I love it. But that's kind of an entry point into the piece itself. Now, you can kind of switch back between documents. I'm going to keep mine open onto here. But I urge you all to just kind of check out the 2 piano score that I sent you all, excuse me, in the Google Drive. And this piece is made up of 5 different themes. And I apologize if I'm going to bounce around a lot, but hopefully it's all going to make sense. I'm going to try to go from biggest to smallest idea here. So it's made up out of 5 distinct sections, and these blend in and out. The opening clarinet theme, which is known as the ritornello theme. It's stated 5 different times throughout the course of the introduction here in different keys, in different orchestrations. So there's no real repetition, and he states it 5 times. And so we're really searching for a home here. Okay, that's an important thing here. And then there's the second theme, which is called the train theme. You can look on page 9. I'm actually going to go back to the piano because these names don't mean a thing to you. Don't worry, I got you covered. I'm going to play some of these for you, at least a little demonstration. So the first theme, let me go back and play that. I can't do the gliss on the piano, of course, but that is the opening ritornello theme. Okay, well, let's jump ahead and play theme number 2, which is at rehearsal 9, page 10 for those of you. So that's the second theme, the train theme. And you can notice there's a lot of like rhythms there. A lot of rhythmic activity, but it's a very fun kind of dancey theme. Then there's the stride theme. Yes, on purpose, the stride theme on page 13, rehearsal 12. That whole theme, you know that theme, it's probably one of the biggest ones. American Airlines uses it as their introduction.
It's gotta be important then.
Earlier, the safety video, right? Or whatever it is. And we'll talk about that AABA thing that happens with that. So let's go on. Rehearsal 14, we have a new theme, the shuffle theme. We all know that theme pretty well. That's the shuffle theme, okay? And then finally, the love theme, which everyone always thinks this piece is divided into 2 parts. The opening and then this gorgeous. That whole beautiful, beautiful, lyrical, gorgeous, lush melody. But actually that is the 5th theme in this piece. It's the last theme. So that's just, you know, when I was first learning this piece, that I also thought the same thing, that really it's divided into an A and a B, but it's really E at this point. Okay, so we mentioned the idea of AABA. I want to go back to the stride theme because it's really cool how he actually uses this 3rd theme. Remember, everyone at this point in time when the piece premiered would have been familiar with his style of writing. And so they would have known how he writes melodies and how they're also memorable. It's the same form everyone else uses those days. Okay, so take a look at page 13, rehearsal 12. If you don't have it in front of you, I'm actually going to pull it up because that's what's important to us right now. All right, let's see here. What page numbers on this one? That's okay. 9, 10, 11 should be the next page. Good. All right, so take a look here. And we're going to go take this 4 bars at a time. So we mentioned that it's either a 16 or a 32 bar form. Let's take a look here. Let's take the opening four bars. That's an A section. The next 4 bars look pretty similar. Which should lead us into a B section. It does. Which should lead us back into an A section. But does it? That A section is a little bit different, and I wanted to show you what this A section looks like here. After we get to the B section, that's not where we're going. Take a look at this melody. So he blatantly decides to ignore the fact that I'm not going to make this a final cadence almost. I'm not going to give you the last 4 bars of the A because that's what you expect. I know that's what you're all expecting, but this is a new form of music, a new style of writing. I'm going to change it up. And so instead of doing that, he goes. A sequence. He makes that into a motivic idea that it's going to keep descending, descending, descending. And out of that, a new idea just comes out of nowhere. And what's really important and really cool how he does this, it's the same instrument that begins the piece. It's the clarinet. The same instrument that gives us the opening riff now has this brand new idea that takes us into a brand new theme, the shuffle theme. And so he has this immense gift already that he knows his forms, he knows what he's known for, what's going to stick in your ear, but then he's going to change it up and give you something very, very different, very new. Okay, let's jump back into this doc right here. So we mentioned that already. But another idea that's really important in how he gives you these 5 themes, sometimes you may not even realize he's giving you the theme. Fragmentation is an incredibly important device for Gershwin in this piece. That's not typical Gershwin, by the way. I just talked about I Got Rhythm, where he basically gives you, oh, what did I just do? This one right here, this one right here. Nope. Whatever, can't find it. But the idea that he completes melodic ideas. He doesn't give you fragments. He gives you the whole thing. That's what he's known for. The idea that he's going to give you 1 bar of a melody, it seems rather weird, doesn't it? But actually, let's go back and find one of these examples where he gives you literally 1 bar of melody, or 2 bars. 2 bars is a good idea. Let's go back to the very beginning. The first time the piano played, I'm going to scroll through my Word doc. That's not going to help anyone. Let's go back to the beginning here. And this is where the piano first comes in, page 2. But we're going to start in square 2, where the trumpet takes over the melody. Which you'd expect to hear repetition of that, which instead is. Then he gives it to you again. So these 2 bars of weird transitional material that don't really seem to have any place. And in fact, if you look at the beginning, that's all this really is. It's theme 1 going to different keys with linking material that's actually foreshadowing the other themes and development of the rest of the piece. In a sense, a really genius way to write this piece. I wanted to show you how he goes through keys. Take a look at the second measure here, or the first real measure after, if you count the cadenza, the riff as the intro, I guess. The first real full measure. Basically, we're in B flat major, okay? And then we're gonna just kind of go down here, then we go into this. And then, so really we don't get this other theme yet. It's just kind of linking material. We're going somewhere. It sounds like we're modulating, we're developing. But he gives you 1 theme and then he's gonna develop it and modulate it right away. It's already unstable, it's already new, it's already different. Okay, that's not like the Gershwin we know. I'm game, I wanna hear more. So where's this gonna go? You just said square 2 is the next time we hear this theme, but now it's trumpet and we're in A flat. So instead of being at square 2, we hear, oh, sorry. where's the third iteration of this theme? And that would be at square 3, where now we're in G flat major. Take a look at the orchestra part here. You get the idea. That's the third time. So we've gone from B flat down to A flat, down to G flat, a whole tone progression of keys, by the way, mind you. Okay, so that's the third time we hear it. Where's the fourth time? Does anybody know what the fourth time is? Did we hear this idea of melody? Anyone have any guesses or ideas? No. Take a look at the first true piano line here. This is where the piano kind of takes over the melodic material. Have we heard the theme yet? No, it's again transitionary material. He's developing this theme again. Why? And then he gives us this mini cadenza. We don't need to hear that. Okay, so where's the next theme? And this is all a big buildup into the first full theme 1. And that is right here. Right before rehearsal 5. It's the first time we actually hear the full version of theme 1 in the piano. But that's really the first time we hear the full theme. But guess what happens after we hear this that cadential figure? We have it restated, another A. And I was here, and now I'm jumping to here. So 5 bars later, this is really 1 bar extended over into 2. And then we have the second A section right here. Again, we have this cadential figure. And so then we have the B section, right? Does that sound like it was in the same key?
No.
It did not, and it's not. And I wanted to show you what happened here. He gives us the B material, which is a B material, but then again, he changes and flips the script. We get to C minor. Okay, so he keeps playing with us. He keeps toying with our emotions. What we think is going to happen, it does not happen. He keeps modulating keys. So we've gone from B flat major to A flat major to G flat major. Then A major is where the piano came in and took over the theme. A major knows the key signature. And that's the fourth one. And the fifth one is C minor. What happened harmonically? I mean, it's a, whoa, okay, we've already gone on a journey. We haven't even got to theme 1 yet. Those are the 5 times that we hear theme 1. And then we get into this poco agitato section, the potential. And it goes on and on and on and on and on and on and on. And then we have a restatement of this whole opening idea. And before we do anything else, we get to square 6. Okay, square 6 it is. And check out this theme. I've heard that before. Oh. So the 6th time he gives you that theme, again in A major. So how he already is writing this piece is very atypical for Gershwin. It's very atypical for his style. It's very atypical for a jazz concerto. It's just atypical. It's unique. And it's really unique for his own voice as a composer, which is fantastic for us. Okay. So we've talked about these themes already and how he does that. We talked about the idea of how he messes with his own concept of strophic development, the AABA, how he changes the last A. And then there's these hidden gems that really, I think, pop and sparkle. So take a look at your scores. I want you to go to rehearsal 13. Okay. And those of you that don't have your scores, I'll show you here. Rehearsal 13. Okay. What was I after? 4 before rehearsal 13. That's right. 4 before. We already talked about this one little hidden gem, that it's already a sequence down, but I want you to look now, not the melody, but what happens in the bass. And the counterpoint he gives you in the bass here. This whole melodic line. And then let's compare that. I want you to just remember that. Does that sound like anything else in the piece that we're going to hear? One of the best ways that composers make their melodies pop and sparkle and remain in your minds and your ears is they foreshadow their melodies and they hide them so that when the actual melody comes around, you feel like you've heard it 75,000 times. And in fact, the very first time I heard this piece, I said the same thing to myself. I'm like, man, I've heard that theme somewhere. The love theme, the very last theme he presents, is actually hidden in this sequential development weird thing here. It's not exactly the same thing, but you notice that is important somehow, and your ear remembers that. Maybe not long-term memory, but short-term. It's going to remember, oh, okay, I get it. That's important. I'm going to remember that. All right. So that's a really cool hidden gem. Another one is for after rehearsal 13. 1, 2, 3, 4. Where did I put that one? Oh, yeah. Right. Okay, so rehearsal 14. Or after, yeah, the hidden theme 1. So theme 1 is, well, if you look at here, wait, I think I wrote that wrong, didn't I? I'm sorry, I meant to write 14, not 13. Whoopsie. If you look at for after 14, what's really cool, remember the opening clarinet melody? Take a look at the 4th bar of 14. After we hear, that random 1 bar of piano if you really wanted to do it like that, but he gives you the rhythmic idea and this cell of an idea, and he embeds it for 1 measure. We talked about fragmentation. Just 1 measure. Cool. How about rhythm 14 rhythm? Oh yes, rehearsal 14 rhythm. Remember I just said that he likes to foreshadow things and all good composers will make you feel like you've heard the piece before? We just talked about how he hides it in the melody. But how about the rhythm? Take a look at the rhythm here at rehearsal 14. Okay. And if I were to speed up theme 5, the same rhythm. So he plays with this idea of 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4, 1. Same thing. Or how about the melody before the 5th theme, 4 before rehearsal 28? Over and over and over and over, the same rhythm. What's gonna happen? So he gives you these elements and he hides them all over the place, these little kernels of rhythm or melody or fragments of other stuff. Really amazing how he does that. Let's talk about 4 before. Oh, we just did. I just already did. So again, to summarize, he's a genius, basically. But what makes this piece so interesting is also that there really is no one version of this. And I wrote orchestrations with a lot of, of these marks because, man, why are there so many? If you look back and go through time, the first one that existed, we talked about the 2-piano version. Then he also wrote a solo piano version, but that's not really well known nowadays. But Grofé obviously wrote the original Paul Whiteman version. We talked about that, the 1924 jazz band version. Yes, like jazz band, like 5 trumpets, 4 trombones, 5 saxophones, like that kind of jazz band. But then he wrote a theater band version. This theater band is a really cool hybrid, which doesn't really exist anymore. It does a little bit on Broadway, but basically it's this weird hybrid of, it's kind of a jazz band with some strings in it and some cool percussion stuff. Not really a typical orchestra or concert band. It's a weird, cool hybrid of that. So a favorite version for that ensemble too. And only 18 years later was the orchestral version released in 1942. And that's the version that we really know most today. But it always comes back to the same question. So which one is the real one? Are they different? They are very different. The material how much material is actually in the piece, how long, how many measures. If you compare the jazz band version with the orchestral version, you'll find some interesting length discrepancies. Obviously, instrumentation is vastly different. So which one is correct? Which one is the real one? Which one is the authoritative version? To make matters more interesting and more complex, why on earth is the recording of Gershwin playing this piece that is 8 minutes long, and then there's the Bernstein version that's 17 minutes long? That doesn't seem like the same piece. In fact, the first link I sent you today is actually that. It's the Gershwin playing Gershwin, basically, recording of him doing a very short and abbreviated version of Rhapsody in Blue, about 8 minutes and 15 seconds long. Compared to the Bernstein version that's very famous on YouTube, it's 17:03. Now there's that very 2-3 minutes here and there because tempos can be slower or faster in corresponding sections, but 9 minutes, that's the length of the piece. There's speculation that it was so short because it had to fit on one side of a recording disc, and that is true to some degree. But then how do you explain that on a lot of these performances that Gershwin did live, most of them that you're hearing about are 9 to 12 minutes long. None of them are 15 to 17. Ironically, Gershwin himself said the piece should be 15 minutes long. Well, how do you explain that discrepancy? Which is actually correct? What he said, that it should be 15 minutes long, or that it actually is 9 to 12? And so that begs the question, how do we get those differences in length? And it's really cool if you actually have a certain score. I'm going to show you, I'm going to stop sharing my screen now for a second. The idea of cuts is very fun. I'm going to show you my score here. Can everybody read that if I want to show you this bottom line?
Yes.
All right, so basically the note from optional cuts would be C to D, E to F, and G to H, which means you can do none of them, one of them, or all of them. Really, it's your choice. And so, okay, let's just take a look at, maybe that's just like 4 or 8 bars. So letter A is here. It's on page 3. Okay, and let's see, it says A to B. Okay, where's B? Okay, it's not on page 4. Okay, it's not on page 5. Not on page 6. It's on page 7. And it's here. It's the second statement of that same cadenza that he then just makes more elaborate. He writes it out in a thing on the way for the piano. So he skips a huge chunk of the piece, and it's actually some of the coolest material. Why would he give that as an option? In fact, he had this whole skip of, that whole thing is cut. Okay, the first full theme 1 that we just talked about. Cut. Okay. And what else is cut? Oh yeah, that whole C minor transition is really cool. everything is cut. That's just one of them, and there's 5 other ones. So there's like all these spots. You can really make this thing 8 to 9 minutes long. Why? Why would we put this many cuts in? So it begs the question: why would we do that? And which is the correct version? In fact, if you go on YouTube, I would challenge you to find honestly 2 of the same recordings, because there's so many different versions that exist in the recording world and in the discography of the world these days, that you really there's just too many. So my question to you all, I'm gonna go back to sharing my screen because I want you to see this question that I wrote out. It's an important one because we've talked about what Gershwin was as a composer. He created a new style of American music. We talked about how he wrote this, the really good devices he used. There's obviously jazz elements, there's classical elements. We haven't dived into too many of those yet, at all really. But how do you think this piece has evolved during the 20th century? Knowing what we know about the cuts, the orchestrations, the versions that exist, the lengths you could do it in, the jazz versus classical debate, where do you think this piece has, like, how has it evolved? Where is it these days? Like, how do we think of it these days? What's different about it, do you think? Did it become, maybe a good answer could be, maybe it evolved more into a jazz piece, or the vice versa, it evolved into more of a classical piece? I challenge you to think about that for a second. Anybody have any thoughts on that? It's a loaded question. It's a loaded question. I'll tell you what I think if you want to hear about that. My personal opinion is it went from a really fun, jaunty, light piece to this really overly classicized piece. Almost like we're apologetic for the fact that this is actually a really fun pop jazz piece that happens to exist in the orchestral world. What we forget in the orchestral world is that this piece did not belong to us. It was first a jazz piece, then a solo duet piece, and only then, by the graces of Fergie Faye, after Gershwin passed away, did we receive an orchestral version of this. So this, in keeping with the spirit of that, it has to be light, it has to be fun, jaunty, the tempos have to reflect that. The length should too. It shouldn't be this like rhapsodic, episode. There's actually a recording out there. I didn't link it because I just didn't want to explain to this, but there's a recording out there of Rhapsody where the soloist argued that because Gershwin was a jazz creator, he improvised and wrote out several cadenzas that actual piece. The recording was 27 minutes long. 27. And Gershwin played it in 8. That's a big difference. It's like making something that's like a 3-minute Mahler leader piece or a Schumann leader piece and turning it into like a. There's no need for that. A good indication of that. We've heard a lot about the opening, very famous clarinet that didn't really exist before and then it existed. That's a great indication because the whole reason Gershwin didn't have it and then added it in is because he loved how quirky, fun, light, and playful the idea was. The clarinetist was messing around in rehearsal because he told them to do so, and that's what he played, and Gershwin loved it because he loved the spirit of how light it was. And how many times these days do you hear that cadenza extended for like 15 seconds, like just. I mean, how many times have you heard that? It's wrong. It's not in keeping with this with the whole piece. It should be a quick one, and then this whole thing should be so fun. And what's really cool is this motive here in the third measure of the piece. Often people say that this is what sounds like laughter to them, like ha 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 ha, and it really actually is, and is designed to be that way. The clarinetist originally played and improvised this whole thing, and he used what is very famous in klezmer music. So he used the riff that's a laughing technique is very common in klezmer music, and it found its way into Gershwin's piece. not Gershwin's intention, nor was Gershwin very familiar with klezmer music, but it made its way into Rhapsody in Blue. And not only do we have a jazz, classical, romantic concerto, we also have a klezmer concerto now. So there's a lot of so many different things that are so unique. Sadly, I think the piece has evolved into. Unfortunately, we have the legendary recording to reference, where he played it with the orchestra, and it was 17 minutes long. It's a great version, and ironically, they make cuts too, but it still has this affect of like this really serious, gorgeous, huge piece. It's funny because I showed you the quote that Bernstein had above about Gershwin and what he thought of the melodies in this piece. So he loved the melodies, and that's actually what the New York Phil bring out when they play this. But what's interesting is Bernstein didn't care for the composition much as a piece itself. He thought it was flawed. He thought that it's not really a standalone piece because you can cut and paste it and make it to whatever you want it to be. So you can literally take out a section and the piece is still going to be fine. And that to him did not indicate a strong composition. What he forgets is that this is, again, a jazz piece where that was very common. You would take out sections, you would take out portions, stuff in. You change it based on what you needed it to be. So it's interesting because the version that he talks about people saying like he doesn't like what a weird hodgepodge of stuff it actually is. It makes sense because their version is the longest one on YouTube, apart from that 27-minute one. So that's very interesting how you think of this piece. And my hope for all of you is that I've challenged you to approach it with a different, emotional and analytical context to it. It's a really, really fun piece that has elements of classicism and romanticism. It's really meant to be fun. And I urge you all to not. We haven't talked about how it's related to jazz. Some of the things are really obvious, but one quick way I can show you is the idea of blue notes and blues scales. I'm going to just go back into the score for a second here. What do I need? I need page 4. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So, nope, that's not. That's page 4. Okay. So this, remember we talked about the first statement of theme 1, that's really the full statement in the piano, where it's beat 2 is a real indication that this is a jazz element of some sort. And why? Because this D sharp sticks out like a sore thumb. Does a D sharp exist in an A major scale? The answer is no. You can argue that's either a whole tone motive or the addition of a blues note. And so if you play an A blues scale, there's that D sharp. Classical, blues. Blues, classical. In every note, in every beat, it seems to switch styles effortlessly. That's just a really cool thing. That's kind of the thing I wanted to sort of end with, actually, too. Those of you that are interested, I gave you a whole bunch of different links. There's 3 recordings of Gershwin playing this piece, all different. And so this is just makes for some really cool comparative listening if you're sitting down with a score. Then there's the Bernstein recording I just mentioned. One thing I forgot to add into this video, actually a really cool video that I watched just today, and that's a terrible, terrible still picture of him, but for those of you that don't know him, this is David Bruce. And David Bruce is very good at what he does. He has a lot of analytical videos about compositions, and so he actually just created one on Rhapsody in Blue, which is really great. I highly encourage you all to take a look at it. It's a great, great video. You can find it on YouTube. It's called Rhapsody in Blue, How Gershwin Broke the Mold. Okay. And that just about does it for us here today. So I wanted to make sure I left room for questions, and I'm sure there's going to be plenty. So who's got Anybody have any questions? Feel free to type those into the chat box if you want. That's the best way to do it. That way I don't miss you.
I have a question.
Sure.
Well, actually, it's just, man, it's a comment. When you talk about the Rhapsody and Blues, it made me think about a piece that I practiced on my own called the Gershwin Harwell Sage by Winsky Korsakov.
Okay.
Cause that piece right there, to me, it seemed like it evolved from that piece, even if he didn't mean to evolve from that piece, but to me it does, because it has that same dance-like thing. It's what's common about and it's like comedic in a way.
Yeah, this kind of goes back to Gershwin in his early days as a composer when he was growing up and as a pianist. Gershwin grew up on the music of Tchaikovsky, Brahms, Beethoven, a lot of the classical stuff, but also obviously a lot of the pop stuff. It wouldn't be a stretch to me if he came across Rimsky's music and loved the orchestration and the melodic writing in it. I don't think it's any surprise that this fifth theme sounds like if you took it out of Tchaikovsky and just copy it, I wouldn't think any less of it, because it sounds like a Tchaikovsky theme to me, like a true Russian kind of gorgeous, lush, even like a Rachmaninoff theme in some respects. So it's possible that there's a connection to that piece. I just don't know specifically to that piece. But it's a good question.
Yeah, thank you.
Where was he living when he made it? So he was living in New York. He grew up in New York, lived in New York, spent most of his life in New York. The melting pot of the cultural world at that time. Everything came through New York, whether it was European influences or new compositions or stuff like that. It's ironic that he was from New York to Boston, because that's the other kind of cultural hub in the Northeast was Boston. Yeah, I mean, it definitely helped to influence him because, like I mentioned before, he worked at Tin Pan Alley, where he got to start as a pianist, as an arranger, as a performer. He got to grow his melodic writing, his everything pretty much came from Tin Pan Alley for him. But obviously being exposed to jazz in New York, being exposed to different clubs, different styles of music, he would hear different music everywhere he went in New York. So absolutely New York influenced him. He used to ride the trains a lot, and that also influenced him a lot. Living in New York gave him that even more of an opportunity to do that. Let's see, what else did you say? Also, did he say whether he was influenced by other composers? He did say he was influenced by other composers, but he says it so poetically, I don't even want to butcher that quote. He basically says he's inspired by everything and yet nothing at the same time. Something like to that effect. He does mention some Russian composers as his melodic influences, but he also mentions, what's his name? James P. Johnson, I think, as his piano performance kind of influence. He loved to model his playing on stride piano players and jazz piano players. So, to say, was he influenced by other composers? It's hard to say that those stride and rag and jazz pianists were not composers, because they would improvise so much and do so many things on the piano that really were their own thing. I'm sure it influenced him to the same degree that his classical exposure did. So really good question, Savannah. Anyone else have any questions? These are good ones. Anyone else? Remember to you can use your chat function if you want.
Oh, I have another question.
Okay.
Also, with this piece made me think about and make you think about like how I played Carmen Suite #1, and also like me practicing Carmen Suite #2 for it's like has that dance-like theme somewhere, even though it's mostly like a theater setting, if you understand what I mean. It makes you wonder that'd be like parallel.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, not even just Carmen Suite, but really any kind of piece that maybe came out of Paris or Spain or France, anywhere really. What Josh is referring to is the Carmen Suites and how much of a dance character they have. I mean, I think 80% of Rhapsody in Blue is a dance piece, and it's meant to be, because the theme. Which theme is it? #2 or 3? Yeah, number 2 is actually, I forget which dance it is, but this is actually meant to be an actual a dance that was popular in jazz clubs in New York. So, I mean, it's not almost the dance. A huge difference why it's not an orchestral piece. It's really more of a jazz club, a pop club kind of piece. We have very much so dance rhythms and dance inflections, dance phrasing, syncopations. It's chock full of it. So absolutely, there's a similarity there. Cool. Anyone else? No one else. No one else is brave enough, I see. Well, I hope this helped. I hope this was a fun kind of entry point into Rhapsody in Blue. I'm not sure how many of you knew a lot of these things or not, but the other thing that I would urge you to pay attention to is the idea of repeated 16ths with different accent marks on them. For example, actually in the beginning of the book, they actually talk about the idea of how they may be running 16ths, but they may be in groups of 3, which is an idea he got from Stravinsky, and he himself quotes that somewhere, I forget where that was. But this idea that there's one rhythmic element happening, but he's accenting another element, this hypermetric thing, is a huge part of this piece too. I forgot to mention that earlier, but I hope this was fun. I hope it was informative and just, I don't know, hope it was just good. So I want to just thank you all so much for tuning in, for having fun with me. I love doing these. I hope you enjoy them as much as I do. So thank you again. Again, if you have any feedback for me on how to make these better or more relevant or whatever, shoot me an email or text or whatever. On Wednesday, we're going to talk about not a piece, but rather an idea, and that's how to practice efficiently, how to practice well, correctly, and how to work up excerpts. The dreaded idea of working up an excerpt for an audition or a piece for an audition, and what the differences are in preparation and all that kind of stuff. So we're going to talk a lot about the technical playing and the technical aspect of preparation on Wednesday. And I'll demonstrate some stuff. How I'm thinking of formatting it is I'm going to give you guys 5 options at the beginning of the chat. So I'm not really going to know which one, but I'm going to give you 5 different excerpts that I could play on clarinet. And I'm going to approach them as if I've never seen them or performed them or anything like that. And actually 3 of the 5 I probably have never seen. So I went like out there. But I want to just walk you through my process, but I also have feedback from other pro musicians who have weighed in. I've asked them separately to give me their own feedback. So I've kind of compiled it into one big presentation / hopefully helpful tutorial. But maybe that'll help you all in your everyday practicing, make it more fun, more efficient, and more relaxing, because how many times do we get stressed out practicing? I do all the time. And I always forget that. So hopefully it'll be helpful on Wednesday. Hope to see you there. And until then, thank you all so much. Enjoy the rest of your Monday. I hope you had a great Easter also. And I hope you all survived the flood. And we'll see you Wednesday. Thank you all so much. I'll talk to you later.
Thank you, Wojtek.
Thank you, Mr. Milisky.
Got it.